Okay, I'd like to welcome you to the Shreve's house, named after William Shreve, who was the first known tenant of the building. He was an archer in the service of King Henry VIII, and given his property, his services to the crown. Although he was an archer, we think he may have also worked for the king as an assassin, or using some very sort of untoward practices on behalf of the king. The word Shreve is Shireve, is sheriff, so he would have been the first sheriff of Stratford. He disappeared after about 3 years. There are a couple of schools of thought. One is that he'd fallen out of favour with Henry VIII, and Henry VIII had him done away, or he may have been called up on the muster on the Mary Rose, which, as you know, sank with all hands lost. The first records of this site actually date back to the 12th century, 1196 to be precise, when the land, which was owned by the bishops of Worcester, actually divided it into plots or burbages. The street pattern that you see locally now does date back to the 12th century, so it's one of the first sort of areas that had a grid pattern. It was separated. The plots have since been divided and subdivided, but in the original 12th century it would have been a very small, modest dwelling, probably not much more than a shed or a shack, so very poor. Obviously this house has had many uses, which I will mention later as we go through. So I will now go through, take you through to the first bit inside, and so you met John Jeffreys, who in 1559 was charged with treason by Elizabeth I. His Catholic practices under the previous Queen Mary. Now Elizabeth was quite generous in as much as she gave him a fine rather than having him executed, but he did have to publicly recant his faith. So in public he was a Protestant, but in actual fact he was still practicing as a Catholic. We did some work in 2007 at the front of the house, and at the front there's evidence of a priest hole, so that was quite common. Everyone thinks that it's a bit like when you watch the Bill when they raid a house. You know, they go in and make a big noise, search everywhere for 15 minutes, and off they go. But usually when the soldiers came in to search a property, it would be 3 or 4 days, or maybe a week, and sometimes if it was a very small priest hole confined, no water or food, they would actually be found dead later on with starvation or dehydration. Now, have any of you ever been to the Garrick Inn at the top of the street? Lovely pub, 17th century. However, before it was a pub, it was known as the Mercer's House. And the owner, Thomas Grething, in 1564, was the first person in Stratford to catch the plague. His wife caught it 7 days later. And the reason I ask you about that building is because it was used as a makeshift mortuary. Now, a couple of you have looked up behind me there, and the reason you can see that, with the plague, which came into Stratford, you had the plague doctors, and as you can see, the gruesome looking figure there, with the hat, the long cloak, the mask with the beak on it. The mask actually had herbs in which they believed would ward off the disease. It didn't, because everyone knows it would caught on the generally fleas from rats or animals that are carrying them from Europe. However, it did help a little bit, because if the plague which spread, it was sometimes you'd go to the swellings into the arm, the buboes, or in the groin. Sometimes it would go into the lungs and you'd cough up a black mucus. And when it was airborne like that, you could catch the disease off anyone. These doctors actually were not qualified. Their only job was to ascertain whether someone had the disease, and they would put them into quarantine. And they mentioned that with the baby up there sometimes. You could have 3 or 4 in a family that have got the disease, and 1 or 2 that are perfectly healthy. And sometimes if you had a young child, you want someone to look after the child rather than they die with you in the house. The reason I mentioned the mask as well is because it's duck-like. That's where you get the term quack for an unqualified. All the big companies and the CEOs and the chief executives, they're in the boardroom. Do you know the origins of that name? Very simple. When you had the big house, instead of having a table, you'd actually have like 2 trestles and a board on top. It was known as the boardroom. So when they'd have one side for the rough days, ready day to day, and when they wanted to show off in front of everyone, they put the good side over. There's a half timber, and it would probably have had wattle and daub infill. During the time when this was actually built, this part, bricks were just starting to become commonplace. So even though it's got bricks on a certain part, that wouldn't be unusual because it was a sign of status if you had bricks in a house. In 1596, we had the Great Fire of Stratford, which damaged the whole of this street, the High Street and Bridge Street, and they brought in a few new statutes, built very early, some of the earliest recorded building statutes in Stratford. You had to have a tiled or slate roof. The buildings had to have brick fireplaces. Some of the more modest dwellings used to have a stone in the middle of the floor. You'd have the fire in the middle and a hole going up through the roof for the smoke to go out. And of course, once you've got the brick fireplaces, it does actually make a house a lot safer. However, when they got the brick fireplaces, chest infections went up. And that was because the smoke used to sterilise the inside of the house. And when you got the fireplace, you'd get condensation. You could have mould or mildew. People inhale the spores and get quite nasty chest infections. I was just saying to the guys earlier, if you touch these beams here, it's got a white powdery texture. That's actually what's called a lime wash. They would do that once or twice a year, and it would actually sterilise the building. It would help to kill insects and make the place a lot cleaner. And in fact, they used lime wash or lime paint up until the beginning of the 20th century in the workhouses, because there was so much disease and infection. It was actually quite a good thing. And interesting enough, nurses' buckles are made of silver, because silver doesn't carry germs. Don't ask me why, but it's metal, you would think you would, but actual silver doesn't carry the germs like other metals. So that's that thing. This building, I've forgotten the date off the top of my head, but the English Civil War, the Battle of Edge Hill, just prior to that battle, this was used as a billet by Dutch mercenary troops on the side of Cromwell. However, the owner, John Lucas, was actually a royalist. They took the place over, took his property. A few days later, he negotiated a peace deal with them and changed sides. And his property was returned. And although you hear in the history books when you've heard father against son, brother against brother, actually a lot of the times people changed sides when it was expedient. So if the royalists were doing well, you were a royalist, and vice versa, because the battle took quite a long time to actually resolve. But there was a lot less loyalty in it than you would actually imagine. Okay, so, and afterwards, sorry, I forgot to mention, this was used as a makeshift hospital for the soldiers. Now, a lot of them would have died as a result of their injuries, but not directly, but usually because of infections from their wounds. So, like if you've got a nasty gash with a sword or something, today you could probably stitch it up, give them a course of antibiotics, keep it nice and clean. They might be in pain for a while, but that was it. Or if you had a serious injury, they'd usually amputate your arm or your leg, and that would mean cutting it off and cauterising it, and then you got burns. You could still catch an injury, an infection. Shakespeare is the most famous son of the town, and everywhere likes to claim their piece of him. Now, I don't know if you've ever been. Have you been to the birthplace? Yeah. Well, when that was first opened or bought by the trust. It was bought. It was the Swan and Maidenhead Public House, and it was bought as the place that Shakespeare was most likely born. Okay, so they don't know the exact place he was born. There is a rumour that his mother was sent away out of town because of the plague during the later stages of the pregnancy, and he may have been born in a country house. So whether it could be completely wrong that he was born in the town. His date of birth is based on his baptism record, and that would be because you were always baptised within 3 days of birth because of the high infant mortality.
So he died on, technically speaking, he died on his birthday at the age of 50. When we mention the claims on Shakespeare and everyone likes a piece of him, this place can genuinely say that he had a connection, because it was owned by a man called William Rogers, whose nephew was Shakespeare's godson, whom he left money in his will, which is documented by the Stratford Society. And it was 3 tons, as I said. So if you do fall over outside on those cobblestones, you can actually be safe in the knowledge that you've fallen over on the same cobblestones as William Shakespeare when he'd had too much beer. Okay. And on this site as well, it was actually, I was talking earlier, I was saying that the site extended further back, and it may have been twice as wide because it's been divided and subdivided. On the site there would have also been stables, there would have been a blacksmith's. Stratford in those days wasn't a very reputable place, so you'd have had the usual number of thieves, prostitutes. Being a tavern, you had a lot of transient people that come into the taverns. It could be a wealthy businessman travelling on his own, checks into the hotel at night or the inn, and in the morning he doesn't check out.
Mm.
And all his property disappears as well, all traces of it. That wasn't uncommon in hostelries of that. As I say, if you look outside, when you go outside the other side, you'll see that nice little modern Shreves Walk, which is a shopping arcade. Up until 1987, on the other side there was a building not too dissimilar to this part. It was owned by Stratford District Council. It was left empty for many years, and they deemed it unsafe to enter. And through a few deals and things, a local property developer actually bought it, knocked it down, and built the Shreves Walk there.